Welcome to the FloodAdapt introduction video. So to start with, let's start with the problem. So cities all over are currently grappling with flooding problems, and these can come from many different sources. You've got hurricanes, you have nor'easters in the winter, high tide flooding, even on sunny days, rainfall flooding, and of course compound flooding, where you may have a high tide and rainfall at the same time. At the same time, there's a lot of changes going on that are also making flooding worse or making the damages worse. So you've got things like sea level rise. We see storms becoming more frequent, becoming more intense, changes in precipitation patterns, more intense rainfall. And at the same time, we've got people moving into cities. We've got population growth and economic growth, so more development. And all of this changes the risk profile in a community. And so the question when you're planning for your city and when you're trying to find solutions is, what is the system response to all of these changes and to the changes that you can make as a community, the adaptation options you can take? So to get the answers and the insights to how your system responds to all these changes, you need models. And this has traditionally been a bottleneck. And so models really need to be easier, they need to be faster, and most importantly, they need to be accessible to the people who need them to make decisions. And that is the motivation behind FloodAdapt. So now that I've sketched the motivation for you, I want to tell you what FloodAdapt is and how it's designed. So the idea of FloodAdapt is it's really designed around the kind of questions that communities are asking, questions about future conditions, questions about how long will my proposed measure be effective? How is risk distributed throughout the community? What if a storm track had made landfall in a different location? All kinds of what if questions that communities really need in order to both plan and engage the communities in that planning process. So the idea is these kind of questions are brought into the FloodAdapt user interface by breaking them into three ingredients of a what if scenario: a projection about the future, an event like a hurricane or high tide, rainfall, and a strategy. So some collection of measures you can take in the community. And what happens is that information is actually passed to the back end of FloodAdapt, which is connected to a flood model and a damage model. Now, the models that they're currently connected to is Sphinx. So it's a very rapid physics-based compound flood model, runs in the order of a couple of minutes, and Delta Fiat, which is an asset level based impact model that is very flexible and also runs very rapidly. So the idea is users' questions are translated into model updates. These models are then run automatically, and and the output is then prepared visually. So you see maps with flooding and impacts, but also all kinds of summarizing metrics to help you understand the outcome of the what if scenarios you've created. That is the idea of FloodAdapt. And there's a lot of tools out there. Some things that we think are very unique about FloodAdapt. The first one is that you can simulate events that mean something to your community. So here's an example. In Charleston, South Carolina in 2022, Hurricane Ian almost made landfall in a very catastrophic location, but it shifted at the last moment and spared the community. Another event is the nor'easter from the end of 2023, which coincided with heavy rains for a compound flood event that led to a lot of flooding in the area. These are events everybody remembers. Another thing that makes FloodAdapt unique is that you can interact with it. So you can specify actions that the community wants to take, and then you can simulate the flooding and evaluate the effectiveness. So a couple of examples, you can see on the left, I am going to select some homes to elevate. So you can see I'm just clicking around on the right side. At the same time, you can see I'm clicking around the peninsula to try out a peninsula seawall. It's really as easy as clicking around. You say how high you want to elevate the homes. You say how high you want that seawall to be. And now they're in your system and you can simulate different events with these measures in place. Another thing that is unique about FloodAdapt is we really try to bring the latest in science and methodologies to practitioners. And one of the ways we've done that is a method that accounts for income disparity in both impacts and benefits. And so these are some methods that are in the literature. The idea is that when you have a loss due to home damage in a high income bracket, it doesn't affect you in terms of the utility of that money as it does when you're in a low income bracket. So that is an optional method that can be can be brought in and accounted for, so you can see sort of adjusted damages taking this income disparity into account. So just to give you an overview of some things that FloodAdapt can evaluate, it's got a lot of features. It can look at lots of future conditions: sea level rise, population growth, economic growth, changes in precipitation frequencies, and also storm frequencies. In terms of events, it can look at rainfall, surge, tide, wind, and river discharge, any combination of these. These can be historic events, a historic hurricane track. It can be a synthetic event, just kind of a what if event you want to look at. And it can also be a set of events, which we use to calculate risk within FloodAdapt. Strategies, you can put in a flood wall or levee, a pump, urban green infrastructure, can flood proof, buy out homes or other properties, and elevate. Oops. And as a last thing, it uses a lot of this information to also calculate risk, and it does a benefit cost analysis to look at the effectiveness of different measures. So that gives you a good overview of what FloodAdapt is and can do. A use case always makes it more concrete. So we've applied FloodAdapt in several locations. I'm going to focus on our Charleston case to show you a couple of questions people had and how it was used to provide insight. So this is Charleston. These are the neighborhoods of Charleston. We're going to look at that hurricane that we talked about. This is the sort of uncertain track right up until the last, hours before it made landfall. And the question is, what would have happened if Hurricane Ian had made landfall closer to Charleston? And so that's what we're going to look at. So what you see here is the interface of FloodAdapt. I'm selecting from a hurricane selector, Hurricane Ian, that brings in the information about the track automatically. And there's a field here that allows me to shift the hurricane. So I can put in a 60-mile shift. I see, yes, that would be a very bad landfall for Charleston. I'm going to look at that one. I give it a name and I say, okay. And you can see that the hurricane is now in my events tab of FloodAdapt. So I run that hurricane and the original and the shifted variant. And then in the compare map section of FloodAdapt, I can see here on the left the flooding as it was. And as I scroll, you see here on the right what the flooding would have looked like if that hurricane had made landfall 60 miles to the west. And here you see the impact. So you can see when I'm zoomed out, this is a heat map. It really helps you see where you might want to zoom in and focus in more detail in. And as you zoom in, you can see that these damages are shown at the building level, and you can really see what would have happened. And this is a really strong communication tool, why such preparations are made, for example, when there's uncertainty in the landfall of a hurricane. You can also get lots of metrics. So you see on the left the actual hurricanes. You can see the number of homes that were impacted, the degree of damage that they sustained. You can see which parts of your community were affected, and also the miles of roads that were interrupted for different types of road users. You can see this information with the hurricane as it was and the shift to really get a sense of how things would have changed with that 60-mile shift. So another thing we can look at is, a community member who says, hey, there's this proposed seawall. Would that have protected us, actually, if that had been built and we had a direct hit from Hurricane Ian? Would that have been enough? And so we can simulate that. So we can draw in the flood wall like this and put in some pumps. And what I'm going to show now, before I press play, is on the left, you're going to see the flooding without that seawall in place if that hurricane had been shifted. And on the right, we're going to see if the seawall had been in place, see if it would have protected the community. So here we go. And you can see as the slider goes that all of that flooding that would be behind the seawall would indeed not have occurred if seawall had been in place. There's still some minor flooding due to rainfall, but the majority of that coastal flooding would have been protected. So that helps the community know that this flood wall would have helped even in this very bad hurricane case. And of course, FloodAdapt helps you engage your whole community. So the flood wall is very helpful for the people living in its protection, but what about communities outside of that protected area? And so we looked at this neighborhood up here to see what could we do there. We added a measure where we elevate these homes up to the same height of protection that the flood wall would have afforded the people behind the wall. So we put in a name for our measure. It's really as easy as just putting in the height that you want to elevate them to and saying okay. And then we can run our simulation again. You see now we have two measures, the flood wall and the elevated homes. On the left, we're going to see the picture with no measures. And now we're going to see on the right what it would have looked like with the seawall and the home elevations in place, again, for the shifted hurricane. So you can see as we toggle over that the flooding is gone from the peninsula. The flooding did not change up here, but when we turn on the impacts, you can see that those impacts are no longer present. And that's because those homes have been elevated. So you can see that with that elevation, these homes would have been able to survive such a direct hit hurricane. So for my last slide, I want to give you information on how you can get started with FloodAdapt. So one thing you can do is contact our team. So you can reach us at floodadapt@deltaris.nl. I encourage you to take a look at the FloodAdapt documentation. You have a QR code here for it. It's available online and includes a lot of information to help you get started. A pre-release application is hosted on the Deltaris USA website, so you can go to this use this QR code to go to that location so that you can play around and try out FloodAdapt. And the FloodAdapt release is expected in the spring of 2025. So stay tuned for that. We'll show it in the documentation when it's available, and feel free to also reach out to us.